Hello, everyone, and welcome to another CCS Alumni Live. My name is Brandy Keeler. I'm the Assistant Director of Admissions here at the College for Creative Studies. And CCS Alumni Live is a weekly conversation where we talk with graduates from the College for Creative Studies about their journey from high school to career. I'm really excited. Today we're going to be talking with one of our amazing communication design graduates. I see is already on the call here. Look at me. So I'm going to add our guest after I read his bio. So today we are talking with Scott Waraniak, who graduated from CCS in 2010. Shortly thereafter, he moved to LA, where he spent most of his time working for studios like Roger LA and Capacity. Scott got to work with clients such as Nickelodeon, NBC, National Geographic Channel, the NFL Network, and many more. After gaining his experience in LA, he decided to move back to Detroit in 2012 and start his own motion graphics studio called Lunar North, where he is the co-founder and currently creative director. Scott is not only an amazing designer, but also brings that knowledge to the classrooms here at CCS as a faculty member. He has also taught in our Motion 1 through 3 classes in the communication design department. And when he's not designing or setting keyframes, he can be found in the woods or riding his bike. So without further ado, I'm going to add today's guest to the live. And hello, everyone who's here with us. Scott, hello, how are you?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Doing good. You know, it's funny, every time I do these, if I see someone who I went to CCS with, I realize that time is an illusion because everyone looks the same. You have not aged at all.
Well, thank you. I feel like I have more aches and like that, but that's good. So, yeah.
Nothing apparent then.
Nice.
And let me know this. Did I pronounce your last name right? I'm always a stickler for last names.
You did, yes.
Oh, awesome. Cool. Well, it's lovely to have you here, Scott, for CCS Alumni Live. I want to just jump off into things. What are you currently working on these days with Lunar North, with your studio?
Yeah, for sure. We're super fortunate. I think given the type of work that we do, like it can still be done from home. So I think the last like 8-9 months have just been slammed for us. We've been so busy, which has been really cool. We've been doing projects kind of all over the place. We had 2 really big long-term projects with Google, 2 products with Google. So we worked on a lot of the content for the new like Nest Hub, which is like this like sleep tracking device. And then we did a lot of things for like Google Fi for like their cell phone network. And then more locally, we've been doing a big project with the Great Lakes Water Authority, which has been really cool. Just kind of give back to a more local organization and kind of give back to the state of Michigan, which I'm very fond of, obviously. And yeah, kind of all over the place. We've been kind of running the gamut of 3D and 2D and illustration-based things. And yeah, it's been great.
So with Lunar North, the work that you all do, you just mentioned 2D, 3D illustration. So you guys are what, like a full service agency? Are you mostly design? Like what all do you provide for your clients?
For sure. I think we consider ourselves a motion graphics studio, but I think that term can be very liberally used. Like it's so the industry is so crazy, and there's so many different niches within it and different things you can do. I think I'd say the majority of our work is 3D based, but we still do tons of 2D and some illustration based things and some character based things. But it's really it all comes back to communication, and that's really like what we pride ourselves on. So that's why we like to be able to use so many different types of tools, because you're communicating a message, you're communicating something for your client. A certain client might need that 3D look and feel depending on what you're doing. If you're doing like a car commercial, or we do a lot of things for different like satellite companies, which is really fun, like really interesting, just being obsessed with space and exploration and things like that. So like those types of clients typically go more 3D because it's more like product and like that. But then a lot of other clients, like it's much more a typography based execution. So like it's much more of a communication through typography and design and layout and things like that. And then clients like Google really tend to use characters more in their things. So it's a little bit of character animation. So we try to approach each project kind of making sure that we're communicating effectively to the correct audience, and then figuring out kind of the art direction that gets applied to that once we kind of lay that foundation of what it's going to be.
Got you. Have you ever had an instance where a client wanted a particular, I know typically the industry adage is like the client's always right, but have you ever had an experience where a client wanted a specific style that like you all knew wasn't best for their audience? Like they wanted something that was 2D and you're like, no, you probably want 3D or something more typographic. Like, does that ever happen?
Yep, absolutely. And typically what we really try to do in those types of situations is really kind of like educate our client and not just always just kind of like give right in, like right away. So like through like an audition phase, almost like in like the exploratory phase, kind of like, okay, conceptually, what are you trying to do? This is what you think we need to do to execute it. So here's what you asked for, but then here are 2 more options of what we think is a better execution. And usually it ends up becoming some sort of amalgamation of those things. But I think it's important, like there's a reason that they're coming to you to help execute their idea. So it's not always about just blindly doing what they want. They want your voice. They want your expertise, your input, whatever it might be. And so I think part of that is educating your client with your process and letting them into your process and letting them know why you think this execution is better than this one, or why this one can work and this one might not. And they might be really, really good at building whatever it is that they build as a product, and you know more about something else. So it's like getting that back and forth and making it much more conversational. I think that's something that we really try to do a lot at the studio, is make that conversation, because it's a lot easier, I guess, to talk through things than to just constantly be executing and trying to like get things out.
Yep. So tell me this, what made you decide to start your own studio? You were in LA, you were working in the industry doing graphic work. What made you decide to branch out on your own and come back to Michigan to do it?
For sure, yeah. Being in Michigan and Detroit, like, definitely was where I always wanted to be. I never necessarily wanted to leave, but in 2010, when I graduated from CCS, there really weren't very many motion studios in Michigan. It really had to be like New York or LA. You basically had to go like one of the coasts to like really do like good quality motion graphics. And so I just felt like there really wasn't an option other than going to the coasts. Mm-hmm. But the idea was always like at some point to come back to Michigan. And it was really funny, while I was out in LA, the first studio that I worked at, Roger, the owner was from Flint, and a couple of other people that worked there were from like the Midwest, sort of just in general. And so it was just like, man, like this is really interesting. I'm living in LA, but surrounded by Midwest people. And then at Capacity, it was actually founded by 2 former CCS alum. And there was another CCS alum working there, and then a bunch of other people from the Midwest working there. So it was like, wait a second, I'm going thousands of miles across the country just to work with other Michiganders. So I was like, okay, well, clearly the talent is here. Like there's something about people coming from this area that can do the work. And so I always wanted at some point to come back and like build a place for people to stay. Mm-hmm. And then 2012, which was way sooner than I anticipated that happening, just some things kind of fell in the right place, and so moved back here and started up the studio, and it's been going well since then.
It sounds like you got clients like, ooh, I think you're doing well.
Yeah.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And I think that's an interesting insight to go, across the country to a different coast to find like, I'm working alongside talent that were from where I just left, finding that existed at home. So why not go and like grow the talent where it already is from? That's awesome. That's a really awesome insight. I think that is an interesting thing to observe. And I have been talking a lot with students, especially now that, with the pandemic, people have been working remote and from different places across the world. Like, I think there's an assumption for certain industries that it can't happen here in Michigan. And so I'm glad that you've shown that, like, yeah, motion design can happen here. There's an industry for it. There's demand for it. And you can do this work from anywhere in the world. That's awesome.
Yep.
So tell me this, Scott. What has been your favorite assignment to work on? Do you have something in your portfolio or something you've done with your company that you feel really proud of?
Totally. Yeah. I think any project that kind of allows for any sort of like systemic thinking. I always like building more than just like a one-off deliverable. Like that's always fun, and you can do some really cool things. Like still enjoy that clearly as well. But like anything that can become a little bit more of a system. So like motion branding is like what I really love doing. So we've worked just recently with Crunchyroll, like the anime streaming service. We got with them for building like a whole toolkit for like releasing new content and like kind of a lot of like the branding that goes along like with their services and things like that. So it's like it's not about just building one animation; it's about building a whole toolkit of animations and like how can you apply this branding across many different assets and things like that. So anything that's more of a system, I always get excited about. Similarly to that, we worked with the tech blog The Verge. This is a couple of years ago now, but similarly, like it wasn't about just making one video; it was about making a series of videos and kind of pulling in branding elements and like how can we really like package this whole thing up into one cohesive sort of thing that still can be very customized individual things, but it's all one big unit as well.
I feel like that sounds like a really fun project and intersection of motion design. I know a lot of times when people think of branding, they may think about the print assets, right? They may think about like even maybe the website, right? But I don't oftentimes hear people thinking about the system of like a brand as it pertains to motion, right? But clearly that exists out there, right? You think about Netflix and the language that they use for different assets on their platform that include motion, but they have to speak to a lot of different systems. I think that's really interesting. I've never even obviously branding touches all facets of a business's identity, but motion branding, that's interesting. That's really cool.
Yeah. It's similar to all the things that you were describing. It is still all those same systems. It's those same things, and like but it's then all of a sudden you're applying it to motion, and you're branding things as far as even like how like the easing curves of like things animate.
Yeah.
Even like down to like those sort of nuances. Like certain companies have like a certain vibe. Like when we were doing Crunchyroll, it was all just like maximalism, like put as much content as you can, and like things are slamming all over the place, and like so like even like the way things are easing, and like that was way different than something like The Verge, where it's much more about like conceptual future thinking, and things have a much more like nuanced, longer format sort of storytelling device to them. So it's like two opposite ends of the spectrum, but still fundamentally the same thing. You're trying to communicate and engage your audience.
That's so awesome. That's so awesome. I feel like now I want to take one of your classes. I'm like, I want to learn these elements of motion branding. Like, what are the different things that you're considering? That's so awesome. Yeah. Okay, so tell me this. We're gonna walk a little bit backwards here. We're not yet jumping into my imaginary time machine, but walking a little bit backwards. Of all the things that you learn in the graphic design, communication design program at CCS, like motion is just one facet of it, right? You're learning interaction design. You're learning the traditional facets of graphic design. What inspired you or made you choose to focus specifically on motion?
Totally, yeah, and that's a great question. I think there's a lot of pressure for people to like know what you want to do right away. And I legitimately didn't even know motion graphics existed, like coming into CCS. Like, I knew that I wanted to do some sort of design, but I didn't really know what. I knew I really liked like typography and some things like that. So I knew like that graphic design and communication design is like where I wanted to be, but I had no idea that motion graphics existed. So it wasn't until I took an After Effects class freshman year that I was like, wait, this is kind of fun. Like, and I really liked the technical aspects of it too, because I think there definitely is, like with other forms of design, it's much more about just putting your idea out. But with motion, there still is like the hardware side to it and the software side of it, where it can be a little daunting, a little intimidating, because there's so much happening in the interface of these programs and things like that. But I liked that my brain didn't quite click with like coding and like doing interaction design and things like that. But what I liked about those classes was bringing my designs to life. So then with motion graphics, I really liked it that I had a lot more control over like directing these elements and making them move. It's the whole design. I just felt like it just clicked better with my brain at the time. Like I said, I had no idea that it even existed. So it's like coming into design just with like kind of like an open mind, I guess, and just like being okay, like, let's see where this takes me, and just kind of letting it kind of get figured out from there. And then once I like had that class, I was like, oh, this is definitely what I want to be doing. And just had a bunch of great teachers over the next couple of years that like, even if it wasn't a motion based class, they allowed me to like tailor projects like to build a portfolio for more motion based projects. So still going through like all my VisCom classes and all like the normal communication design classes, but kind of tailoring my projects to be a little bit more motion graphic based.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So preparing you for specifically what it was you want to do with that degree. So let's now hop in my imaginary time machine. I want to go back and talk to or talk about high school, Scott, because you mentioned like you were going into design. You didn't know motion graphic was a thing, but when you were like leaving high school, or when you were in high school, you know, preparing for college, like did you know specifically that you wanted to do graphic design? Did you have graphic design in high school? How were you planning your career back then?
Totally. I think I was super fortunate in that my grandpa went to CCS and my uncle went to CCS. So I was
Legacy.
already in the family, which I'm very grateful for that. So I didn't know for sure, I guess in high school, I didn't know for sure I wanted to go into design, but I knew I wanted to go into art in some realm.
I see a joke in the chat.
I went to high school with Ed, so that's great. Yeah, so like we really didn't have very many art classes in our school. I think we had like jewelry design and art, and like that was it. I don't even know like what the class was necessarily called. So it's way more like illustration based, like fine art, painting, things like that. And so like I still really enjoyed that. And so coming out of college, I wasn't sure if coming out of high school, I knew I wanted to go to CCS. I actually didn't apply anywhere else. I just was like, that's where I want to be. But I didn't know if I was really into photography and like video at the time. I was really into illustration. And so I didn't really quite know what discipline I wanted to go into, but I knew it was art of some sort. And then I think at graphic design just felt like a much more encompassing sort of, I still got to take photos, I still got to draw if I wanted and things like that. So I think for me at the time, it felt like a good, well-rounded sort of way to scratch all those itches and try to figure out which one I liked best without ever knowing that motion graphics was going to be the one that
Right. That was the end of that path.
Exactly.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I think that's a great story to share because I know there are a lot of students who are applying to school. They know that they're interested in creativity and art, but they're like, I have no idea what specific area I want to focus on. There's so many things that I'm interested in. So I think your story is interesting because not only did you explore, you know, a major that had the things you're interested in, but you still found something that was completely unrelated. Well, not unrelated, but like completely different from all those things too, you know? So that's awesome. I see we have a question that came in the chat. Oh, nope. Someone just waved at us in the chat box. For those who are joining us, if you have a question for Scott about communication design, motion design, being a CCS student, being an entrepreneur, any of those things, make sure to drop those in the question box or the comments so we can get your questions answered live. So, okay, in high school, you had some generalized art classes. You were exploring generally art, and then you applied to CCS. You knew that's where you wanted to go, and you had that family history of knowing what CCS does for folks. So a question I have for you is, when you were at CCS, what were some of the experiences, aside from taking that After Effects class and falling in love with that, would you say are some of the experiences or things you've learned that prepared you best for the industry? Did you do any internships? Did you have a specific faculty member that guided you? Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the thing that like my biggest takeaway from like my CCS experience, and I think the thing that I try to tell people like wanting to get into whatever sort of art it is they're trying to get into, I think the biggest takeaway for me is in the classroom, like having like class critiques and like because I think what I like so much about that process that you don't necessarily get online, you don't necessarily get without that human interaction, is getting the confidence to like present your work and like talk through it. And then even more so than that, having people question your work. And then you're like, oh wait, like I do have to be able to defend these decisions. Or if I didn't make a decision of why that way and I just thought it looked cool, like maybe that's not a good reason. Like, so I think like the biggest thing for me was like really understanding why I'm making things look the way they are or why they're functioning the way they are, and making sure that there was some sort of reasoning or some sort of concept behind that. So I think pre-CCS, I was just so focused on the aesthetic of it and just making sure that it looked a certain way, but I wasn't putting much thought in it past that. So it was like giving that critical thinking to it and giving that like conceptual thinking to it, I think was the biggest thing for me. And then aside from that is just, once I started doing that, I had even more confidence about sharing my work, because then I could defend every single reason of why I had it. And like, yep. I think that was the biggest takeaway for me. And what I, like in my classes, what I really try to get people comfortable doing is sharing that work in progress, because it's not about just the final product. It is this process to get there. And I think the more open and the more conversations you can have about your work through that process, not being so precious about the end product and knowing that like, oh, why was I doing it this way? Like that isn't a good idea. Like, and it's like being so in your own head sometimes about just that sole end goal focus of that final product, but it's so much more than that. And so I think that's what I had a lot of great teachers, and I had a really close-knit class, like our senior class at CCS. Like we all, I was renting a house in Royal Oak, and literally there was no furniture in the house, just desks. And so like the entire senior class basically would like come over and we would just do homework together. Like that's what we would do. So like, I think I got really lucky that our senior class was like a pretty tight knit group, and a lot of us would work together. And it was a lot more of like that studio sort of mentality of like, yes, I'm executing my own projects, but like I'm brainstorming, I'm bouncing ideas off other people, and I'm helping other people. And by doing that, I'm getting inspired, and you're just around this like creative group that's constantly elevating everybody. And it's like, it's a friendly competition, but it's still a competition of like, oh, I want to be better than that person, or like whatever it might be on whatever project. But I think it's like having that friendly competition along with the confidence to be able to present your work is like the biggest.
Those are huge takeaways. I think, especially in your line of work where you have your own business, right? You're not only gaining clients, but like having to pitch to clients your ideas, like being able to stand behind every decision that you make, you know, everything from pacing to like the design elements. Like, I think that confidence, like you mentioned, comes from having that process done over and over and over, right? And it's funny how many art students, high school students I talk to, I'm like, well, why is this like this? It's like, oh, I just thought it looked cool, you know? Getting in the habit now, even in high school, of thinking like, why am I doing this? Why am I making these decisions? That carries you very far in a career. And then I love the term that you use as far as friendly competition. I know we talked in a lot of these lives about like the family dynamic of CCS, like we are in this space to work together, but I think, like you mentioned, the huge benefit of having other creative, talented, hardworking people next to you is like you have. It's not the same as like you know, a school where someone's doing art as an elective. You know, it's like, no, we're all here determined to be successful, and so, you know, bouncing ideas back and forth with other talented, strong, determined artists elevates your work as well. So that's awesome.
Yep, absolutely. I think that's a great point. Like it's not an elective. This is like, if you're here, this is like what you want to be doing as a career. So you want to be elevating yourself as much as you can, and like kind of comparing yourself to other people, and like, okay, if that student is doing well and like I can recognize my work isn't there, like how do I get to that point? Or like kind of having
I think the wonderful thing about CCS is like, it's been my experience, and it seems like yours, that you can tap that person and be like, hey, how did you get, like, what do I need to be doing differently, you know?
Yeah.
And people are pretty open with that. All right, so I see a question came in the chat. Where do you draw inspiration from in relationship to current trends and popular media?
Yeah, I think motion graphics right now is in a really weird state where I think a lot of people are pulling the same reference. And so like a lot of studios, I think, are starting to look really similar. And like, I think motion graphics right now is like going through a phase of like a lot of things looking the same.
Is it,
And
tell me, I have an idea of what it may look like, but tell me, describe what is the trend that you see happening in motion graphics right now?
It's a lot more like 2D, like very like unproportional characters and just
illustrated
like really,
people, hobby people. Yeah.
So it's a lot of that right now. And it's not necessarily a good or bad thing. I'm just saying like that's sort of the state of the industry right now is a lot of that. And so I think what we really try to do at the studio is, of course, acknowledge those trends because you have to stay relevant, and you have to make sure that you're up on those things. So what we're really trying to do right now, we're making like a very conscious effort to like not fall into like that trend. So we're looking is outside of motion graphics for any sort of inspiration. So like just for like general like shot composition and lighting and things like that. Like we're looking more at like films and movies and things that we like, and just pulling screen grabs from those, or like a lot more like photography or installation based art of just like any of those types of things. We just like, it's still very similar to what you're doing, but it's just like slightly outside of your realm. And I think like, especially like for 3D and like for lighting, there are so many really interesting installation based projects that are just like bathing people in light and like all these like really cool things. And so I think like we're trying to like look at some of that for like our more 3D based projects. And I think as far as like the 2D based ones, it's just all about like how can you still acknowledge those trends but try to own it a little bit more. But I think going back to your original question, I kind of went on this crazy winding path there. But like where I'm looking for inspiration is I'm just trying to look outside of our industry, just so it doesn't become this like very cyclical, like exact same projects over and over. So I'm trying to look at more like traditional art or movies or photography, I guess. Yeah.
No, that's awesome. And I feel like that's something we heard of a few times on the series, as far as where people pull inspiration from different industries. We've heard quite a few times people say like, go outside of what your industry is, go outside of what your wheelhouse is, because you can pull more unique references that way, more unique inspiration. Yeah, no, that totally makes sense. And when you said like there's a trend going, I was like, I bet it's those illustrative wonky people. That's what I call them. They're everywhere. Do you have any ideas or dreams or forecasts for what may be coming in the future of motion design?
Yeah, I think right now, and we're already starting to like touch on a little bit with some projects. There are so many really good like real-time render engines like Unreal and Unity and that. So we've done a handful of projects now in Unreal. It's so strange because forever the biggest hang up with motion graphics is the render time. Like if you're doing like really photorealistic 3D renders, you need a huge, powerful machine. Then you have to set renders overnight or set them on a render farm, and like the next morning, hope it turned out the way you want.
Right.
But now with these render engines, like we just did like a 2-minute piece that's all in 4K, and we needed to render it out, and it took like 30 seconds. It just has to write the file. It's all happening real time. So like, it's a really interesting way of working, and it's just like fundamentally such a shift, because there are no more render times. It's just all happening like real time in your computer. And like, so it's a different way of working, but I think there's a lot of potential there. And then pre-COVID, we were really kind of pushing the studio and kind of changing it a little bit to be much more like installation-based motion graphics, I guess. Like, so not like, yes, like trade shows with huge screens and things like that, but much more of like having some sort of interactive element to it, just because it's so easy to set up a webcam now and code something with Unreal or Unity. Again, I'm not coding it. As I mentioned before, code doesn't work with my brain, but there are people on the team now who are like, we can really utilize like real-time motion graphics, I think, in a really interesting way. So I think that's where we're really starting to see a lot of change and a lot of progression. Is like, what is a good way to utilize any sort of real-time motion graphics in a way that doesn't feel gimmicky, in a way that is actually like enhancing
the experience
and so what you're trying to do. And so I think right now the challenge is really like, how do you take it away from a gimmick and how do you make it like, actually feel functional and important.
Yeah, I can see that being huge because I think as certain technologies emerge, like the gimmick part is engaging, right? Because it's new,
Yeah.
because it's like, oh, great example is like augmented reality. When it first came out, there was like arbitrary augmented reality. Like, look, I can pop an animal off a cereal box. Okay. But I think as people get accustomed to using these technologies, accustomed to these things, then yeah, you want it to be functional and purposeful in the way that you're using it, such that people like want to engage, right? So that the QR code has a purpose. You know?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think we've had a couple successful projects where I think things have worked well in that regard, where like for augmented reality things, like you can tell a lot more of a story than just like passively like viewing something on your screen. You actually get to interact with something a little bit more. Like you can actually, like, yes, it's still on the screen, but you can like tap it, you can interact, you can move it, you can, so like you have audio, you have visual, and then now you also have like this experiential aspect to it. So like you can tell a lot more in a shorter amount of time.
That's so exciting. I always love thinking about what the future holds for art and creativity and design. So that's exciting. So one more question from me for you, Scott, unless our audience, please, if you all have questions for Scott, make sure to drop those in the chat or in the comments here. But the question that I have for you is, based on everything that you know now about your industry, about your path, what advice would you go back, if you could, and give your high school self as you were stepping into your creative path? What advice would you give yourself?
Ooh, that's a tough one. I think I think like almost like revisionist history, I guess, like where I feel like I was pretty open and like willing to like let external things kind of influence me a little bit. But I think like if I would have done more of that in high school, I think I guess if I would have like researched more in high school, I think that's what I would have like. So I would have. So I really enjoyed. I grew up racing mountain bikes and BMX bikes and dirt bikes and all that kind of stuff. And I was always making like videos for me and my friends and things like that. So like I was working like in a timeline, like in a program, but I didn't know that like you could make a living like doing that. But I guess I wish I just either had somebody to like point me in that direction, or I wish I was more open with what my interests were and like talk to more people that were in art in some way. Because like, who knows, maybe if I would have just like talked to somebody like, oh no, you know, there's this whole thing like people just do titles for movies and like you can just animate typography. Like, I'm like, what, you do that? So like,
Yeah.
like being more open with what I was interested in and not feeling like, oh yeah, I like art, so I draw. And like just knowing that there could be so much more than just illustration. And it's not a knock on illustration. I love illustration. Like it's not, I don't want it to come out as like anything like that, but I like in my head, art was illustration.
Drawing. Yep.
Drawing, exactly. So I guess like doing a little bit more research on my own to see what other formats I was interested in, what other things kind of would have gravitated towards a little more.
Yeah.
Just knowing what else was out there. Yeah.
Yeah. I feel like making a college choice, making a choice for a major, making a choice for a career, that's a huge life decision, right? It's what we spend like 80,000 hours of our life doing.
Right.
And, you know, you kind of want to have some insight when you're making a big decision like that. Clearly, people end up fine, right, without doing that. But I think that is certainly helpful. Like the more exposure you have to what your opportunities are, you can make more succinct decisions, probably save some time depending on the decisions you make. But that's awesome insight, awesome advice. I see a question came in, and I'm not familiar with this term, but maybe you are. Someone asked, what is your take on NFTs? Are those a type of, I don't know what those are.
Terry was the creative director and my boss at Roger, the place in California when I was freelancing there.
So what is an NFT?
So, was it non-fungible token, but basically the like buying digital art. So like so like there's motion designer goes by Beeple, and he sold $60 million or something insane like that, like some of his art. And it's like you are the owner of, so like basically like easiest way to describe it would be like okay, we all know like the Mona Lisa is like in the Louvre and that is the Mona Lisa. So like if I have a print of it on my wall, we know that that's not the Mona Lisa.
Right.
So like this is like a way of like saying like I own this digital piece of art. This is my piece of art. Anybody can print it. Anybody can screenshot it, whatever. But like this is I have the original kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So I think so like that part of it I'm down with. But I think the part that's very like the downside of that is like the way that like all this like cryptocurrency and all that stuff is kind of working right now is like it takes so much power to like mine all of like this things and like keep these things like private, I guess. Like I'm this is the part where I get a little bit hazy on what the NFT side of it is, but like I just know that it requires a ton of power to like keep it or to purchase it, something along those lines. And I know it's like that side of it is weird. I'm sure somebody can describe it much better than I can, and like that's the part where I'm like not entirely certain on it. But it's a really weird, new, booming big thing. Like
so is the idea that the NFT is almost like almost like a copyright that you have to renew, like something you have to continuously update, such that you are continuously seen as the owner? Is that what you're saying?
No, it's more of like the. Yeah, I wish I knew more about this part of it. It's something along the lines of like the ownership of it, like to provide the currency to buy it, like the biggest thing. So NFTs only represent 3% of the. Yeah, see, so Michael Carrion knows more than you. So I wish.
Well, I appreciate the question. We're learning more about things that are happening out in the art world and the digital art world too. So that's awesome. Scott, I've learned so much about motion graphics, about what you've been up to in your creative journey, and the advice that you've given today is, I would say, priceless. Hopefully the students who tuned in or who are watching this recording will take that advice to heart. Is there any last words that you want to share? Where can people go to find more about your work, what you're doing with Lunar North? Where should they follow or subscribe?
Yeah, Lunar North Design is our handle on Instagram. We're not as good at updating that as I wish we were, but that's the easiest place. Contact us on there. Yeah, reach out to me anytime. I mean, my handle is just my name, Scott_Waraniak. Motion graphics is my life, is what I do all day, every day, between teaching at CCS and the studio. Like, I love it, clearly. Like, I wouldn't put this much effort into it if I didn't. So I'm always down to answer any questions, help anything, email me, message me on here, whatever. Like, I genuinely mean it. Like, I want to get more people into motion graphics. I think it's great. I think locally, like, we're starting to really build up a really cool, like, Michigan community of motion designers between, like, our studio and Gunner and Hobbs and First Fight. Like, there are so many awesome studios here in the Detroit area that are all doing really great work, and we're all kind of like falling into these little niches within motion graphics. There's so many great opportunities, and it's awesome to see that we don't have to keep outsourcing talent to the coast, and we keep it here, which is the biggest thing and why we started the studio in the first place.
Oh, awesome. I have actually one more question, because you're a teacher and because of the advice that you just gave, or the things that you just talked about. For students like you may have been in high school who aren't familiar with the opportunities for motion graphic design, what are some things that someone could look at that they are currently doing or interested in that may be hints that this is something they should look into?
Good question.
I know you mentioned like you were making videos for your friends and yourselves, bike explorations, but like, are there certain things that are like, that's probably an indicator that I should look into motion graphic design?
Yeah, I think anybody that has any sort of like technical mind, like they enjoy like the technical side of something. I think there is like, that's like the biggest hump to get over, is like, I've seen a lot of students that really like watching motion graphics, or like they get really excited about like seeing motion graphics, and like they get excited about making style frames and like figuring out the aesthetic of it, but then like they get intimidated jumping into the program, just because it's one of the few realms where like you do get bottlenecked a little bit by like what you can figure out how to do in the program. I think like I see a lot of students get deterred really quickly by that. And so I think like once you get over that hump though, and you can really start to see like how much you do. Like for me, like I remember as a student, like one day it just sort of clicked and I was like, oh, that's what that does. And like then but it took a lot of blood, sweat, and tears to get to that point of like just being completely frustrated, because there is like this learning curve to kind of get over that. But I think if you have some sort of like technical mind, or like you really like problem solving, then I think like working in After Effects or working in Cinema 4D or working in Unreal or any of these other types of programs, I think that might suit you because there is a technical aspect to it.
Awesome. All right. Hopefully students watching this keep that in mind. And if I run into those students, I'll make sure they know that keep in mind motion graphic design.
Sweet.
Scott, thank you so much for joining us for CCS Alumni Live. It was amazing talking with you and learning about your journey. For those of you who have tuned in, make sure to check back in next week. If you aren't already subscribed to CCS's mailing list, you need to subscribe, because that's where we announce the upcoming Alumni Lives first. People who are only following on Instagram find out somewhere between 24 hours before when we do it. So make sure you're subscribed to our mailing list. We hope to see you at the next CCS Alumni Live. I hope everyone has a beautiful weekend. Thank you so much, Scott. Have a great one.
Yep, thanks so much. We'll talk soon.
Bye.
Bye.